For the ancient Greeks, Zeus was the father of mankind, king of the gods, and the god of civilized life, who imposed order on all things and led all the other Olympian gods in procession. Recent evidence from excavations in Arcadia, Greece, testify to the worship of Zeus stretching back to the 14th and 13th centuries BC, with Mount Lykaion in Arcadia moving up as a frontrunner in regards to the so-called birthplace of Zeus. But it is another god who was definitely born in Arcadia, the son of Zeus and Maya, responsible for delivering Zeus's words and wishes to the mortal world. The smiling, handsome youth, possessed of cunning and a clever tongue, harboring the skills to summarize complexity, persuade the stubborn, charm the beautiful, and born with the innate knowledge of harmony, music, language, and the audacity to play tricks even on the deathless gods. This is the divine Hermes, messenger of the gods and the psychopomp or guide of souls in the underworld, an inventor of the lyre, a patron of gymnasts, wrestlers, and a dear friend to travelers. With his winged hat and sandals and his golden caduceus, he outwits witches like Circe, rouses mortals from the haze of sleep, and amuses the gods enough to be welcomed to Olympus, even though he lied to Apollo's face and stole his cattle. By what means, then, did Hermes make his first impression, and on the same first day of his birth, prove skillful enough to become a dutiful servant of Olympus, despite his thievery and deception? In various parts of Greece, the festivals of Hermes were celebrated, and his temples and monuments, and the vast literature testifying to the god's influence, demonstrate that the cult of Hermes may very well be an ancient one at that. The festivals dedicated to Hermes were the Hermaea. In Athens, boys celebrated this festival in the gymnasia, dressed to their very best, and engaged in the amusement of sports and games. In Crete, too, were the festivals of Hermes, celebrated with the same custom observed during the Saturnalias in Rome, when slaves would, for a day, enjoy the lifestyle of their masters. And in Arcadia, the birthplace of Hermes, these festivals were enjoyed in the town of Phaneos. At property boundaries, gates, and thoroughfares, herms or herma were set up. Initially, these were stone heaps, but later they became quadrangular stone monuments surmounted by a bust that derived their name from Hermes, and took part in some of the various roles the god embodied. This form is one that Aesop shows us. Quote, "There was a four-cornered statue of Hermes by the side of the road, with a heap of stones piled at its base." This pillar ritual relates to Hermes in his capacity as a god of ways, and Cornutus, a Stoic philosopher of the 1st century, says that when persons would pass by these herms, they would add to the pile by throwing a stone atop the heap. Often herms contained an erect phallus at the lower portion, but their earlier forms seem to be that of a heap of stones alone. And the word herm is supposed to have derived from a heap of stones. In Arcadia, where there were many herds of sheep and goats, herms helped to mark boundaries and provide landmarks, serving as a reminder, too, of what god watched and presided over the flocks. It is also from Arcadia that we have the earliest geographic source of the Hermes cult, whereas Pausanias indicates more of an Athenian origin. Nonetheless, it is still under debate whether or not Hermes was a pre-Hellenic deity, as Herodotus would have us believe, or if the god was aboriginal to Arcadia, where we find his influence enjoyed a preeminence it did not receive in equal portions in other parts of Greece. The famous indictment and exile of the Athenian statesman and general Alcibiades in 415 BC is also related to the mutilation of Hermes in the Athenian agora. Herodotus, the famous early Greek historian, posited that the initiates of the Kabiri mysteries of Samothrace possess a sacred tale about the ithyphallic images of Hermes, but he does not divulge this tale on account of the vows of secrecy taken by the initiates. Herodotus explains that the Athenians learned of this imagery of Hermes from the Pelasgians, who are referred to as an early pre-Hellenic people who inhabited the lands around the Aegean. Quote, "The Athenians then were the first Greeks to make ithyphallic images of Hermes, and they did this because the Pelasgians taught them. The Pelasgians told a certain sacred tale about this, which is set forth in the Samothracian Mysteries. This erected statue of Hermes possibly relates to his association with the goddess Aphrodite, for as Plutarch says, the two gods were continually consecrated together by the ancients. And as we will see, the psychology implied in Hermes convinces us that he is persuasive, which is not a skill any suitor should lack when they are aroused and in pursuit of a lover. In Plato's dialogue on Hipparchus, the Greek astronomer and mathematician, proof of Hipparchus's wisdom is demonstrated by the fact that he educated residents of the countryside to set up figures of Hermes, or Herms, along the road and in the midst of the city and the towns. Quote, "There are two such inscriptions of his. On the left side of each Hermes, there is one in which the god says that he stands in the midst of the city or the township, while on the right side he says, 'The memorial of Hipparchus, walk with just intent.' There are many other fine inscriptions from his poems on the other figures of Hermes, and this one in particular, on the Styria road, in which he says, 'The memorial of Hipparchus, deceive not a friend.'" Much later in the 2nd century AD, we find the geographer Pausanias referring to Herms set up in Athens, quote, "In the gymnasium not far from the marketplace, called Ptolemy's from the founder, are stone Hermi well worth seeing. The Athenians are far more devoted to religion than any other men. They were the first to set up limbless Hermi." But the birthplace of Hermes was in Arcadia, and on the borders of Arcadia were many stone figures to Hermes. Quote, "On the borders stand stone figures of Hermes, from which the name of the place is derived. Quote, at the Arcadian gate leading to Megalopolis is a Herma of Attic style, for the square form of Herma is Athenian, and the rest adopted it thence." Now, to enter a full study of Hermes, we must take account of his origin story, building a tenure from which his earliest traits, deeds, and features can be contextualized. It is, of course, tempting to cover the full scope of the development of Hermes, from his early Egyptian counterpart in the god Thoth, down to his amalgamated Greco-Egyptian form in Hermes Trismegistus. Paired with this would be the no less interesting gods of other pantheons who take part in similar roles as Hermes does for the Greeks. We do intend to cover this entire situation in a series of videos, along with a psychological and archetypal analysis of Hermes, and a broad study of the cults dedicated to him. But about the lore surrounding his birth and his earliest references, we must first gather our bearings. Some of the choicest Greek myths correspond with or contain important deeds of Hermes, and the god seems everywhere sneaking into the dramatic rituals related to the mystery cults. As guide in the underworld, he is depicted on a three-figure relief as joining Orpheus and Eurydice in the realm of Hades. So too was Hermes involved in the myth of Dionysus and the rites of Demeter and Persephone as celebrated at Eleusis. In fact, the god himself was born in a cave, and his chthonic traits, chthonic meaning concerning, belonging to, or inhabiting the underworld, are likewise reinforced in that we find the boy priests who prepared the catechumens for the mysteries of Trophonius in Labadia called themselves Hermi. Hermes was often given prayers after a banquet before sleep. He is called a bringer of dreams, and the Pythagoreans were said to adopt him as the guardian of souls and the watcher over the portal of life. Nowhere else is his origin story better told than in the first Homeric hymn to Hermes. The Homeric hymns, however, were somewhat neglected in antiquity, despite their genuine state and their synopsis of what were no doubt earlier and established stories, whereas the poetry of Homer and Hesiod was not so much neglected. The Homeric hymns to various Greek deities are called Homeric because the poet Homer was at times their attributed author. Since this is unlikely, the Homeric title also sticks because the composition of the hymns date back to as early as the 7th century BC and can be seen as harboring material reflective of the Homeric period. Despite the lack of an early analysis of the Homeric hymn to Hermes, the features and deeds of the god that the hymn lays out are certainly in line with how early Greek writers represented and explained him. What follows is the tale of the birth of Hermes, which I will directly quote from and summarize without leaving out anything vital. You will find contained in the story the essential characteristics and responsibilities associated with Hermes that later evolve and take on new color depending on the time and the region of the god's worship. I sing of Selenian Hermes, the slayer of Argus, lord of Selene and Arcadia rich in flocks, luck-bringing messenger of the deathless gods. Hermes was born in Arcadia to the shy goddess Maia, daughter of Atlas, who mated in secret with Zeus in the dead of night, in a shadowy cave on Mount Selene, when no god or mortal man could know. For then she bare a son of many shifts, blandly cunning, a robber, a cattle driver, a bringer of dreams, a watcher by night, a thief at the gates, one who was soon to show forth wonderful deeds among the deathless gods. Born with the dawning, at midday he played on the lyre, and in the evening he stole the cattle of far-shooting Apollo on the 4th day of the month. For on that day queenly Maia bare him. For as soon as Hermes leaped from his mother's womb, he did not lay around in the cradle, but sprang up seeking the oxen of Apollo. But as he stepped over the threshold of the high-roofed cave, he found a tortoise and laughed in delight. The creature fell in his way at the courtyard gate, where it was feeding on the rich grass, waddling along. When Hermes saw it, the luck-bringing son of Zeus laughed and said, "An omen of great luck for me so soon. I do not slight it. Hail, comrade of the feast, lovely in shape, sounding at the dance. With joy I meet you. Where you got that rich gaud for covering, that spangled shell, a tortoise living in the mountains? But I will take you and carry you within. You shall help me, and I will do you no disgrace. Though first of all you must profit me. It is better to be at home. Harm may come out of doors. Living, you shall be a spell against mischievous witchcraft. But if you die, then you shall make sweetest song." And so Hermes grabbed the tortoise, cut off its limbs, and scooped out the marrow with an intuitive swiftness. So glorious Hermes planned both thought and deed at once. Cut stalks of reed to measure and fix them, fastening their ends across the back and through the shell of the tortoise, and then stretched oxhide over it by his skill. Also he put in the horns and fitted a cross-piece upon the two of them, and stretched 7 strings of sheep gut. And Hermes tuned his strings and found its sound marvelous. The gods sang sweet random snatches, even as youths bandy taunts at festivals. He sang of Zeus, the son of Cronus, and neat-shod Maia, the converse which they had before in the comradeship of love, telling all the glorious tale of his own begetting. But even as he sang, his heart was bent on other matters. Hermes laid his lyre in his sacred cradle and sprang from the fragrant halls and went scouting, craving for meat despite his youth, and pondering sheer trickery in his heart, deeds such as thieves pursue in the dark night falls. The sun was setting when Hermes hurried to the mountains of Pieria, abundant in the grazing cattle of the gods. It was then that Hermes cut off 50 cattle from the herd and drove them across a sandy place. And crafting a deception, he turned the hoofprints around, reversing them. And for his own steps he fashioned overly large sandals to confuse his tracks. Nearby an old man tilled his vineyard and saw Hermes hurrying down the plain. Hermes, seeing him, told the man he would surely have vines full of fruit if only he stays silent about what he has seen. Leaving the vineyard and through the night, his dark ally, Hermes drove the cattle onward, through many plains and gorges, and by a river the cattle fed and drank. Hermes gathered a pile of wood and sought the craft of fire. Quote, "For it was Hermes who first invented fire sticks and fire." While the fire blazed, Hermes threw 2 horned cows on their backs and killed them. He took out the richest meats. Glad in his heart, Hermes lays out 12 portions of his meat in sacrifice to the 12 Olympian gods. And though he craved to consume the meat himself, his pride as a god prevailed, and he refrained. When he finished, he discarded his sandals to the river, quenched the embers, and covered the ashes of the fire with sand. At dawn, luck-bringing Hermes comes straight home in Selene in stealth. Approaching the doorway, he passes through the keyhole of the hall like a misting autumn breeze. Inside his cave, he crept into his cradle, wrapping himself in his swaddling clothes as if he were a feeble infant, clutching the lyre closely with his left hand. But Hermes could not pass from his mother without her notice, and Maia says to him, How now, you rogue? Whence come you back so at night time, you that wear shamelessness as a garment? And now I surely believe the son of Leto will soon have you forth out of doors with unbreakable cords about your ribs, or you will live a rogue's life in the glens, robbing by wiles. Go to, then, your father got you to be a great worry to mortal men and deathless gods. Then Hermes answered her with crafty words. Mother, why do you seek to frighten me like a feeble child whose heart knows few words of blame? A fearful babe that fears its mother's scolding? Nay, but I will try whatever plan is best, and so feed myself and you continually. We will not be content to remain here as you bid, alone of all the gods, unfed with offerings and prayers. Better to live in fellowship with the deathless gods continually, rich, wealthy, and enjoying stores of grain, than to sit always in a gloomy cave. And, as regards honor, I too will enter upon the right that Apollo has. If my father will not forgive me, I will seek, and I am able, to be a prince of thieves. And if Leto's most glorious son shall seek me out, I think another and a greater loss will befall him. For I will go to Pytho to break into his great house, and will plunder therefrom splendid tripods and cauldrons and gold, and plenty of bright iron, and much apparel, and you shall see it if you will. At dawn, Apollo came over the grove and to an old man near his fence, and Apollo asks the old man how it came that 50 of his cattle are gone, while the bull and the protecting hounds were left behind. Now tell me this, asks Apollo, old man born long ago, have you seen one passing along behind those cows? And the old man, though his eyes were not as strong as they once were, tells Apollo of a child he saw following the long-horned cattle and driving them backwards. Apollo moves on and foretells by the omen of a flying bird that this child must be the son of Zeus. Apollo marvels upon finding the tracks and sees them reversed, and wanders over the other large sandal tracks. Undeceived, Apollo descends to the cave of Maia and Hermes. When Hermes saw Apollo raging over his cattle, he once again wraps himself in the clothes of an infant and cuddled himself up like a newborn, faking sleep even though he was wide awake, and cleverly concealing his lyre. And now as Apollo peered about the great dwelling, he found closets of nectar and ambrosia, and great portions of gold and silver. Quote, child lying in the cradle, make haste and tell me of my cattle, or we too will soon fall out angrily. For I will take and cast you into dusky Tartarus, and awful hopeless darkness, and neither your mother nor your father shall free you or bring you up again to the light, but you will wander under the earth and be the leader amongst the little folk. Then Hermes answered him with crafty words. Son of Leto, what harsh words are these you have spoken? And is it cattle of the field you are come here to seek? I have not seen them, I have not heard of them. No one has told me of them. I cannot give news of them, nor win the reward for news. Am I like a cattle lifter, a stalwart person? This is no task for me. Rather, I care for other things. I care for sleep and milk of my mother's breasts, and wrapping round my shoulders in warm baths. Let no one hear the cause of this dispute, for this would be a great marvel indeed among the deathless gods, that a child newly born should pass in through the forepart of the house with cattle of the field. Herein you speak extravagantly. I was born yesterday, and my feet are soft, and the ground beneath is rough. Nevertheless, if you will have it so, I will swear a great oath by my father's head, and vow that neither am I guilty myself, neither have I seen any other who stole your cows, whatever cows may be, for I know them only by hearsay. And afterwards Hermes begins to whistle and dart his eyes. Apollo laughed softly, calling him a rogue, deceiver, seeing plainly that the child had already robbed far more than his cattle to enrich his mother's dwelling. But come now, said Apollo, if you would not sleep your last and latest sleep, get out of your cradle, you comrade of dark night. Surely hereafter this shall be your title among the deathless gods, to be called the Prince of Thieves continually. For it is not I who stole your cows, said Hermes, after Apollo picked him up and bid him to guide him to the cattle, nor did I see another steal them, whatever cows may be, and of that I've only heard report. Nay, give right and take it before Zeus, the son of Kronos." And bickering back and forth, Hermes and Apollo traveled to the summit of Olympus to seek out Zeus and came to the assembly of the gods. And Zeus welcomed them and asked why Apollo has brought this herald of a child to Olympus. Thus Apollo recounted the tale, saying he knew of no one else who had so beguiled gods and men but this shifty child, and still had not found his cattle. Afterwards Apollo sits, but Hermes pointed at Zeus, saying he will speak the truth and that he cannot tell a lie. He tells how Apollo came to his cave, making accusations and threats. Quote, "For he has the rich bloom of glorious youth, while I was born but yesterday, as he too knows. Nor am I like a cattle lifter, a sturdy fellow. Believe my tale, for you claim to be my own father, that I did not drive his cows to my house. So may I prosper, nor cross the threshold. This I say truly. I reverence Helios greatly and the other gods, and you I love and him I dread. You yourself know that I am not guilty, and I will swear a great oath upon it. No, by these rich-decked porticos of the gods. And someday I will punish him, strong as he is, for this pitiless inquisition. But now do you help the younger." But Zeus let out a resounding laugh, seeing clearly Hermes' schemes. He tells them both to be of one mind and find the cattle, tolerating no further deception. And quite easily did Zeus hold sway over Hermes. And so Hermes shows Apollo the hiding place and releases the cattle. And when Apollo saw how Hermes strung up their hides and flayed 2 of them, he wondered more how Hermes possessed such strength, and tested Hermes by binding him. But the bands could not hold Hermes, and Hermes caused then the plants of osier to grow up and entangle the grazing cattle, all to Apollo's astonishment. And with eyes glowing in fire, Hermes timed his production of the lyre perfectly, stringing up a music to Apollo's joy. And Hermes sang a tale of the birth of the gods, telling how they came to be. Foremost of all the gods, however, Hermes praised the goddess of memory and mother of the muses, Mnemosyne, an affinity for which Hermes has demonstrated by his complete understanding of the gods upon birth. Severely moved, Apollo proclaims him a trickster and a busy one, a comrade of the feast. Quote, "This song of yours is worth 50 cows, and I believe that presently we shall settle our quarrel peacefully." And Apollo asks how it is that Hermes possesses such skills and gifts of music. "But now, since you, though little, have such glorious skill, sit down, dear boy, and respect the words of your elders, for now you shall have renown among the deathless gods, you and your mother also. This I will declare to you exactly. By this shaft of cornel wood, I will surely make you a leader renowned among the deathless gods, and fortunate, and will give you glorious gifts, and will not deceive you from first to last." And Hermes praises and flatters Apollo, bidding him to take up the lyre as a gift from Hermes. For by accepting this, Apollo will honor him as well. In fact, Hermes espouses the benefit and a kind of philosophy of music, in that it teaches the player of the cunning of the mind and its delights, abhorring the foolish and toilsome, for which the lyre's gift could serve only as vanity. Quote, "When Hermes had said this, he held out the lyre, and Apollo took it, and readily put his shining whip in Hermes' hand, and ordained him keeper of herds. The son of Maia received it joyfully, while the glorious son of Leto, the lord far-working Apollo, took the lyre upon his left arm and tried each string with the key. Awesomely it sounded at the touch of the god, while he sang sweetly to its note. And Zeus was glad the gods became friend and the anger subsided. Hermes too did not surrender his lyre without crafting another instrument of music. Quote, "But for himself Hermes found out another cunning art, and made himself the pipes whose sound is heard afar." Apollo then encourages Hermes to think well of his office given by Zeus to establish the deeds of bartering among men, and to ease Apollo's heart. Hermes nodded and promised never again to steal from Apollo, only if Apollo would love no other immortal better than Hermes. And it is here that Apollo gifts Hermes with his famous caduceus. quote, "Verily, I will make you only to be an omen for the immortals and all alike, trusted and honored by my heart. Moreover, I will give you a splendid staff of riches and wealth. It is of gold, with 3 branches, and will keep you scatheless, accomplishing every task, whether of words or deeds that are good, which I claim to know through the utterance of Zeus." Apollo teaches him of certain beings possessing the power of divination, and warns him not to seek after the arts of soothsaying. And leaving Hermes with his gifts, Zeus confirms Apollo's words, quote, "And commanded that glorious Hermes should be lord over all birds of omen, and grim-eyed lions, and boars with gleaming tusks, and over dogs and all flocks that the wide earth nourishes, and over all sleep. Also that he only should be the appointed messenger to Hades, who, though he takes no gift, shall give him no mean prize." Thus the Lord Apollo showed his kindness for the son of Maia by all manner of friendship, and the son of Cronos gave him grace besides. He consorts with all mortals and immortals. A little he profits, but continually, throughout the dark night, he cousins the tribes of mortal men. And so, farewell, son of Zeus and Maia. A minor analysis of Hermes' traits, related to those found in the Homeric Hymn, contain the following. Hermes as a shepherd of the non-agricultural animals is obvious, and Hermes as a thief is established by his theft of cattle and the other items in Maia's cave. Homer as well alludes to Hermes' mastery of thievery in the quotes you will find on screen. For the Orphic hymns, the early poets, Aesop, and over 1,000 years later, we find this trait firmly stored in Hermes' arsenal. Into the house came Hermes in the shape of a young man, unforeseen, uncaught, eluding the doorkeeper with his robber's foot. As a god of cunning and wit, this is easily found in the hymn, as well as the inventor of fire and the inventor of the 7-stringed lyre and pipes. Hermes in the hymn becomes the first to sacrifice to the Olympian gods, when he uses the 12 portions of meat. All the same, he becomes the first to sing a hymn to the gods. Hermes, as a gifted liar, gives him the mind to see through lies. In Hesiod's works and days, we find Hermes involved in the creation of the first woman. Hesiod, quote, "Also the guide, Hermes, contrived within her, Pandora, the first woman, lies and crafty words, and a deceitful nature at the will of loud thundering Zeus, and the herald of the gods put speech in her." His trickery and stealth are plainly seen when he reverses the cattle's hoofprints and slips through a keyhole, discarding his sandals to the river, or conceals the lyre until an opportune moment arises where he can make it his gift to Apollo. But this gift could be construed as another scheme of Hermes, because it could be argued that his gift comes with conditions and is more in line with a transaction than a present with no strings attached. This firmly attaches Hermes to the kind of mindset and methods often employed by merchants, a profession Hermes becomes a patron of. We see, too, that by his gift and his skill, and despite his lies, he receives his golden rod, his caduceus from Apollo, which leads into the greater responsibilities he receives from his father Zeus. When Apollo teaches him about divination and oracles, we can see here why Hermes has come to be associated with interpreting, no doubt a trait one should require to make sense of their own dreams. This brings to mind the indispensable passage from Plato's Cratylus, where Plato constructs philosophical etymologies for the names of the gods. Quote, "Socrates, let us inquire what thought men had in giving them their names. The first men who gave names to the gods were no ordinary persons, but high thinkers and great talkers. This name Hermes seems to me to have to do with speech. He is an interpreter and a messenger, is wily and deceptive in speech, and is oratorical. All this activity is concerned with the power of speech. Thus we have the proper source for the word hermeneutics, fittingly defined as, quote, "the branch of knowledge that deals with interpretation, especially of the Bible or literary texts." We find an instance of Hermes serving as an interpreter of oracles, or a kind of prophet, in the Achaean city of Pherae, where beside Hermes' statue in the marketplace stood a hearth altar with bronze lamps. The consultant came during the evening, set coins on the altar, and whispered into the ear of the statue what he wanted to know. The consultant closed his ears and his hands and then departed. And when he removed his hands, whatever he heard first was to be regarded as a sign from the god. As a god who understands where things belong, so to speak, we are reminded of the demonstrable intuition Hermes possesses on the first day of his birth in the hymn. Hermes, therefore, was a reliable friend for those seeking to discover their purpose or their skill, or to find their elegance. As an example of this, we have a fascinating passage from Philostratus in the life of Apollonius of Tyana. Quote, "Many people resorted to the temple of Hermes, asking for the gift of wisdom. Now when on the appointed day they arrived of the distribution of the gifts of wisdom, Hermes, as the god of wisdom and eloquence, and also of rewards, said to him who, as you may well suppose, had made the biggest offering, quote, 'Here is philosophy for you.' And to him who had made the next handsomest present, he said, 'Do you take your place among the orators?' And to others he said, 'You shall have the gifts of astronomy, or you shall be a musician, or you shall be an epic poet and write in heroic meter, or you shall be a writer of iambics.' As the Greek poet Callimachus wrote, quote, 'We ask the boon of learning easily, the gift of Hermes.' And what other gift than learning a variety of skills is more in line with the Hermetic prerogative? Returning to Hermes and his role as Prince of Thieves, it might seem contradictory that he also presides over the civilized but implicitly deceptive art of commerce, and yet was the patron of those robbers and friends of the night who might attempt to bypass the rules of commerce altogether. Just the same were Hermes set up before the door to a house. Hermes, the guardian of the door, the gate, the threshold. We don't need to think hard about how important crossing these boundaries are. If someone barges into your home, they are not only disrespecting you, but the god himself. Now let's look closer at the rustic cult of Hermes to make sense of these attributes. How do the people in a civilized city, for instance, worship a god whose morality begins to gray when he becomes the patron of the thieves? It is pointed out by Louis Farnell in his The Cults of the Greek States, however, how this moral gray area is not so gray when in fact the thieves are stealing from a nation who had conquered them. Farnell suggests there is a deeper relationship here. Perhaps the pre-Hellenic Pelasgians, who Herodotus suggests provided the Greeks with their imagery for Hermes, also made an impact on the Greeks in regards to Hermes the thief. Because for a conquered people to adapt to their invaders, their gods would likewise share in their vices. As well, making one's living on the road is a two-way street, we might say, between the bandits and the merchants. We don't suggest they would have ever been in equal numbers, but what the merchant and the thief share are the faculties of Hermes involved in both ways of living. We should remember too by this example how myths are not left to storytellers alone, but are enacted and embodied in practical life. Therefore, much as human culture, the roles of a deity and their acceptable traits are likewise subject to great change, and no other god, save for Hermes, seems to take on such a variety of these changes, being a jack of all trades and a master of even more of them. As god of the marketplace and the inventor of weights and measures, Hermes guarded the sanctity of marketplaces set up on neutral border grounds between multiple villages. He became the Roman Mercury, from where our words commerce, mercantile, and commercial are derived, the Latin word merx meaning merchandise or commodity. Now say we arrive on some neutral border ground, and we are a ship-faring merchant approaching a Greek state, carrying some ornamental cedar from Lebanon and incense shipped north from Egypt. Now at this neutral trade ground we see a Herm or some statue of Hermes, and we are relieved that our client's god watches over the sanctity of the trade. In this fashion, Hermes becomes an invisible regulator of commerce, perhaps instilling a sense of trust where that trust is desperately needed. If, as a merchant, for instance, we fail to deliver quality goods or deceive our customer, we should not hope to come back to the same territory and do business again. Our reputation is also at stake, and so, under the watchful eyes of the god, who could see right through our lies, and who knows all the depths of crafty and deceptive speech, we're further impelled to enact an honest trade. Plutarch, the Greek historian, tells us there was a ritual custom in Samos that when the Samians sacrificed to Hermes, they had leave to then go and steal and pickpocket. We wonder then by these rituals how a people might develop a festive or a holiday's allowance and tolerance to the practice of thievery. As seen through the lens of this ritual custom, the act of thieving becomes less morally questionable and more culturally acceptable. But as for a full study on the cult of Hermes, we leave for a later video. It is clear then that Hermes is a being of creative instinct and quick decision, and we will bear in mind more of his other features that distinguish him and his believers. Hermes, we must remember, relates to magical defense and counterattack. His role in this respect is seen in Homer, when Odysseus is given an antidote to counteract the sorcery of Circe, and his role in the magical arts are also given in certain magical papyri. As a herald, Hermes becomes a patron to legitimate heralds who serve kings and rulers, and have to bring their king's messages to various places, implying some degree of skill in oration and persuasion. In the future, we will visit Hermes in his capacity as the slayer of Argus, guide of the dead, god of astronomy and astrology, his identification with the planet Mercury, and of course, his identification with foreign gods as well, such as the Egyptian Thoth, Roman Mercury, and the Thracian Zalmoxis. Thus, we have only touched on the various traits of Hermes that stem from his earliest references. With these general themes, we have a kind of prototype for the various anthropomorphic personalities Hermes is attached to, from the time of Homer all the way to the Renaissance. Now, we always have to ask ourselves as well what the gods actually are. It is never as simple as reducing a god to a psychological trait, or claiming that gods serve only as archetypes. Too much of this without supporting data is a projection of our own opinions onto a more ancient subject, which is totally fine so long as we aren't positioning our personal opinions as ancient belief. Too much allegorizing discounts the potential historic and legitimate existence of the gods for what they originally were, and also the practical ways in which a civilization made use of them. Nonetheless, this did not stop various ancient writers and philosophers, especially the initiates, from implying that viewing the gods through the lens of symbolic interpretation was not an inaccurate means of ascertaining the truth. But more of this will be explored in our videos on the cult and psychology of Hermes. We conclude then with a reading of the first Orphic hymn to Hermes, composed sometime between the 3rd century BC and the 2nd century AD. This hymn, translated in poetic English by Thomas Taylor, captures many of the covered features of Hermes and provides yet another example of how a Greek worshipper regarded him. Hermes, draw near, and to my prayer incline, angel of Jove and Maia's son divine, studious of contests, ruler of mankind, with heart almighty and a prudent mind, celestial messenger of various skill, whose powerful arts could watchful Argos kill. With winged feet, 'tis thine through air to course, O friend of man and prophet of discourse. Great life supporter to rejoice is thine, in arts gymnastic and in fraud divine. With power endued all language to explain, of care the loosener and the source of gain, whose hand contains of blameless peace the rod, Corusian, blessed, profitable God, of various speech, whose aid in works we find, and in necessities to mortals kind. Dire weapon of the tongue, which men revere, be present, Hermes, and thy suppliant here. Assist my works, conclude my life with peace, give graceful speech, and me memories increase. With that, if you would like to support the channel, you can find a link to my Patreon in the description. And thanks for stealing some time back with our channel's very own patron, Hermes, Prince of Thieves.